This video won't be about how to give yourself a lobotomy with a sausage roll, but instead it's going to be the history of the worst APC series out there. I know, boring. This is about the BTR. How did it go from the BA64, which had some cool ideas, to the cursed side exits of the BTR 60PB that defines the BTR series, and also that the BTR stands for broke, trash, and retarded. So, maybe some of you have noticed that I love comparing vehicles to the BTRs, and then crapping on them because what else life can give you, apart from war thunder, alcoholism, and an opportunity to drop a fat log on a Russian vehicle. The story starts with the BA64, which means Broniowanie Automobil. This is what the BA stands for, which is literally armored car. The Soviets looked at the SDKFZ-221 and took some inspiration and changed the BA-20s, and they went from that into the BA-64. This would sometimes have a 7.62 machine gun and sometimes a Dishka. And they produced those until 1946 because of how good they were in the primary role, which was scouting. They pumped out about 9,000 of them, and you may ask, Hussar, why are we starting with a scout car? What has that got to do with APCs? Well, the Soviets would try to improvise APCs out of the BA-64. Well, something like the Allies did with the Kangaroo out of the Rams. So back to the Soviets. They made the BA-64E, which was a BA-64 which had an open top and a rear exit hatch. However, this was flawed from the start because the BA-64 was a car for two people. It wasn't suited to transport a whole squad of 6 people. It was too cramped and the infantry would have issues getting in and getting out. So what did the Soviets choose it? Well, it was the most produced armoured and lightweight wheeled vehicle at the time, and that was the only thing that was available. So, finding also a photo of a BA-64E is a bit of a mess because there was about 11 prototypes with the same name. After looking at the SDKFZ-251, some M3 half-tracks, and their own half-tracks like ZIS-22, GAZ-60, ZIS-42, they had some realizations, and let's not make a half-track because it's stupid, which was a good assumption. And then they made the first BTR variant, a BTR 152. They took a ZIS 151 chassis, and they made and they just up-armored the whole thing. And because of this, the whole development was insanely fast. If you look closely, you will see that they took some inspiration from a German SDKFZ-251. And also, it's like an SDKFZ-251, just not a half-track. The Soviets noticed, and they need some better terrain crossing capabilities because it was a bit slow. So they fiddled a bit with the wheels, and then they made the system where you could release some air from the tires and pump it in, just on the move even. So when they were slightly flaccid, like your dad, then they would perform better on rough terrain, and when they were pumped up and nice and hard, they would perform better on roads. The prototype sucked a lot, like Lano Road's son's mum's amounts of sucking, and they were slow and they barely drove because it's surprising that when you put armoured plates on a vehicle, it's gonna be slower and heavier. So after 3 years of prototyping, messing with eliminating issues one by one, just not elimination like NKVD style, but like actually designing things. In 1950, they finally made the BTR 152. We all know, and it was the first APC in the Red Army with the name of BTR. Meanwhile, as all of this was happening, a different factory was making an APC as well. They called it the BTR 141. It had two 14.5mm KPVT HMGs, and the other BTR 141 had no armament, and after some more work they renamed it to the BTR 40 and it got accepted into service. version with two HMGs would be called BTR-40A, and the one without was the BTR-40. So the Red Army had two different NPC designs in its ranks, a BTR-152 and a BTR-40. And if they had two 14.5mm HMGs on top, then it would have an A at its name. Here's a BTR-152, BTR-152A, BTR-40, BTR-40A. So, the pump in and out air system I mentioned earlier on the BTR, well, that was on the BTR-152B. And, in the 152, that was a bit of a breakthrough when it comes to development. However, it still had a too-weak engine. So, they later made the BTR-152V, and that had a new frame, new engine, and it could also tow other vehicles. It was like an ultimate BTR-152. Now, BTR-50. Based on the hull of a PT-76, the Russians made the BTR-50. The Czechs got the license and, they adapted it slightly to their own need, and they named it OT-64 Topaz. And Poles also used the Czech Topaz, and they named it Topaz 2AP, which had a modular turret on top which you could put on an OT-64 skot 2AP. I'll talk about the OT-64 Scots soon. Don't worry, all my Polish and Czech fans. So that's all the interesting stuff about the BTR-50. So back to the Soviets. So they used the BTR-40 and the BTR-152 in combat, and they realized that open top sucks. The Soviets went to the drawing board, and at that point there was a bit of a breakaway when it comes to design philosophies. They made the BMP series and the BTR series, a unit which would work more around tanks and would have more armor in the ranks. That would be the BMP. And if you were more infantry focused unit, you would get a cheaper BTR. Basically, mummy and daddy giving you less attention. After experimenting and prototyping by Kaz, Zil, and Gaz, the prototype from Kaz won, because it was the best vehicle, the Object 1015. However, the prototype from Gaz won basically because, well, something very retarded, very Soviet, very communistic. Same thing. The Gaz prototype won because it was cheap and simple to build en masse as fast as possible. And that's how the BTR-60P got accepted into service. It had no roof and very often didn't have an armament. Some had a 7.62 machine gun and some had a Dishka. Meanwhile, Poland had a Topaz 2AP, which had a roof and a 14.5mm HMG. Speaking of Poland, let's go to Czechoslovakia. They sensed the smell of something horrible coming their way from Russia. The stench was so powerful they felt it through the beer and knedle, and they started building their own thing together with the Poles. So the Czechs made the hulls and Poland made the turret. And after mixing Polish beer, some Czech beer, knedle, poverty, hunger, wheels and steel, the ultimate beauty, the OT-64, was created. When the Russians had the BTR-60P, meanwhile Poles and Czechs had a turret and a HMG and a roof. It was a superior vehicle to the BTR-60. So, back to the BTR. Well, they put a roof on top and they put a BRDM turret on top. Soviet designers became clowns at this point. Well, the engine is at the back, and when the BTR-60 didn't have a roof, this wasn't too much of an issue. And the troops need an exit. So what did they do? You put the side doors in. This solution was the worst design choice in history of this vehicle. It's the main reason why it's bad. Let me explain. When you're getting in and out through this thing, you have a chance of getting mauled by the wheels if you are on the move. And troops have died this way multiple times. It's harder to get in and out in the first place. And also, it's hard to get a guy on a stretcher in, which supports a claim I hear a lot about NATO is betting at getting wounded guys out of the fight. And retards, communists, are better at replacing the guy with two more. The BTR 60PB was, well, a bad design. I hate just looking at it. Also, imagine a scenario where it gets hit, it's on fire, you're panicking, dizzy, disorientated, probably a concussion, and you have to get out by using this. Good luck. You see, in the Polish wonderful language, we have this phrase for this situation: w dupie po same łokcie, which means in your ass up to your elbows. This isn't about fisting your homies goodnight. The meaning of this is that you are in deep shit up to your elbows. And the BTR 60 could only protect you from 7.62 MG at the sides and 50 cal at the front. At the time, this was a bit of a standard protection for multiple vehicles. Even like an M113 would sometimes have it worse. However, an M113 was survivable. Okay, calm down your emotions, everyone. Now let's look at the exits on the OT64. Look at this, so many exits. Also, such a sexy vehicle. Okay, I have to change my pants now. Just give me a minute. Okay, so I'm back. Let me remind you that the Russians just figured out that a roof might be needed at the time that Poles and Czechs already had a skot. The skot had, there were two different versions. There was a turretless, which could carry 18 men, and a turreted, which had 10. So back to Russians with their circus. They realized that the BTR-60 isn't as good as they wanted, so they changed the hull slightly, and they put a BMP-1 turret on top, and that's how they made a GAZ-50. And they realized, hey, it's too expensive, so let's just put a BRDM turret on top, and that's how the BTR-70 was made. It's just a BTR-60 PB with a new hull, just slightly changed, really. So, the BTR-70, it could carry two Igla manpads in the back. So, that's pretty nice. And, anti-aircraft capabilities are always good. And if you take out two seats from the infantry, you can put extra AGS-17s in there. Afghanistan had shown that the Russian design circus had made the side doors. There was some unfunny jokes. And also, another little unfunny joke that they made on the Russian army is that they put two engines inside instead of one. So a series of modifications was made, and they upgraded the BTR-70 into a BTR-80. It's just a modified 70. They eliminated a few issues, and the BTR-80 was so similar to the 70 that upgrade packages were given to the 70 to make it into an 80. Mostly a turret replacement, which was the biggest change, but the 80 had a single engine instead of having two, which was easier to maintain and so much simpler. Changing a 70 into an 80 is like putting makeup on a pig, it's still a pig. So the BTR-80 could carry 7 men, and if you don't like the side exits, well, they're here to stay. They haven't learned anything. So, the 80 had smoke launchers, so you can now hide the pig if it encounters a helicopter for some reason. It had 60 degrees of gun elevation. Guys, in the 90s and 80s, helis could use ATGMs from helicopters. Let me check a little thing. The Apache was tested in 1975, and it was getting produced in 1982. So the BTR, although it could take on a heli, it wouldn't happen at all, as the ATGMs would outrange the gun. That's actually funny, not gonna lie. Eventually, communism fell, and, the greatest freaking event to ever happen, the fall of the Soviet Union. And then there was no money, and, the Russian design circus didn't have much funding for a very long while, and that's why, lately the development of the BTR series, not much has happened. So, remember when I talked about the GAZ-50 prototype, where they tried to have the BTR and BMP have the same armaments? Well, the BMP-2 was around now, and they made a BTR-80A. They just put a 30mm autocannon which wasn't stabilized. Let me just check something. The Bradley was made in 1981, although to be fair, it's better to compare the M2 Chadley to the BMP failures than the BTR failures. Someone let Russians cook, and they came up with a BTR 82, which, it's basically the trend from the BTR 60 all the way on until now. You just make slight little upgrades bit by bit. The BTR 82, so spool liners, night vision, navigation system, new engine, and stabilizer. So the pig with makeup now also has a dress, and it's still a pig. So just like a pig is still a pig, the BTR 82 is just as much of a coffin on wheels as a BTR 60. Now, BTR 90, so in the 90s they wanted to make something new, but just like I said, full of communism, finally! Full of communism, no more Soviet Union, and all those things. So they didn't have money to really develop new stuff. And development got delayed of what is essentially a BTR 80 with a BMP 2 turret. Wow. So BTR 90, thermals, hunter-killer system, 2-man turret, and those are the nice changes which were made on it. But obviously they didn't even bother changing the worst troop exit to exist. So the BTR 90 had 80 GMs, 30mm autocannon, neutral steering, aircon. So what's happened to it? Well, it got produced from 2004 until 2009, and it got tested by what you can call a Russian NKVD, kind of like an SS or Gestapo, but Russian and poor. In 2011, they just decided that it's just better to pump the BTR 82 until they get the Boomerang into production. The existence of the Boomerang is questioned by many till this day. Now you know why the BTR is such a bad series of vehicles. It's just the BTR 60 with a changed hull and turret. While Germany is replacing Marders, Poland is developing the Borsuk and a new turret for the Rosomak. USA is making a Bradley replacement, and Sweden already has the perfect CV90s, which are the wet dream of anyone who's a fan of modularity. Russia is just modernizing the BTR even more, which, it's the thought process of, yeah, just modernize the BTR 60, yeah, just modernize the BTR 70, yeah, just modernize the BTR 80, just modernize the BTR 82. And the main issue of the cussed side exits hasn't been eliminated for decades. Low infantry survivability, just get it a spool liner. And then there is the Boomerang, which should have been around decades ago. Meanwhile, German Puma is already built in hundreds. You see, the Boomerang is a bit like the Russian Armata and the Su-57. It's able to compete with the West's past generation, while the West is making the next generation, and mass production is nowhere near to be seen. Well, now after knowing why Russians drink so much, I'll finish the video and maybe do something better with my life. To anyone who is still around, tell me if longer videos like this, talking about multiple vehicles or the history of a certain vehicle, is something that interests you more. So please like and subscribe, because alcohol isn't free, and I believe I might have caused a European shortage for the next decade while having to do the research for all of this.